Continuing on with cross-sectional anatomy of the spinal cord, we're going to focus on the white matter. Now, we know back when we talked about the brain, white matter, gray matter, white matter has a higher amount of myelination compared to the gray matter. And by having myelination, there's more insulation. So those neurons can travel longer distances carrying action potentials. So when we start looking at the white matter here of the spinal cord, we're primarily looking at neurons that are traveling up and down the spinal cord, connecting from cervical to lumbar, or traveling from the spinal cord up into the brain. We're looking at more long distance transmission, not little tiny hops from one side to the other side. So we're looking at more white matter going up and down. Now the fibers run in three primary directions. We have ascending fibers carrying sensory information up. We have descending fibers carrying motor information down. And then we have these transverse fibers. The transverse fibers will be coming down or going up in the white columns and then leaving to interface with the gray matter. It's a way of trying to get the information into the gray matter we've talked about already. So we're looking at mostly ascending and descending though. So here we have the posterior funiculi, also known as the posterior white column. We then also have the anterior funiculi, or known as the anterior white column. And then last but not least is going to the lateral funiculi, or the lateral white column. It's on the side. Together, all three of these white columns have ascending and descending tracts primarily. They kind of look like this. So gray matter is in the center. We'll leave that out. Ignore that. But look at all the white matter. We have the blue is ascending going up. The red is descending coming down. Notice anything unique about this? Well, maybe if I just cut this right in half. Notice anything now? The right and left side are mirror images of each other. Well, it makes sense because you have a right and left side to your body. They both have to have the same controlling mechanisms as well as the same sensory input mechanisms. So the right and left descending and ascending tracts are mirror images of each other. Now, we're not going through all of these tracts, but there are a few to look at. We'll start with these two, which are sensory tracts. We have the spinocerebellar pathway. That spinocerebellar pathway, if you notice, over here, it's a muscle proprioceptor. Basically, if the muscle gets stretched out too much, it reacts. It's more of a subconscious control. You can see how it enters the spinal cord, going through the dorsal horn and the dorsal root ganglion. Then it's heading up the spinal cord. But it only goes right here. It only heads to the actual cerebellum, our subconscious control. It's not actually going up to a conscious area of our brain. Again, because that's a subconscious control mechanism. But in the dorsal column, the medial lemniscal pathway, so dorsal column, medial lemniscal pathway. There's two ones we're starting with here. One's in the foot, that's going to be a touch receptor. And then we have one that's in the wrist, which is going to be, again, a proprioceptor for stretching of the joints. Both these are more of a conscious aspect. So what's going on here now is they're both traveling up the spinal cord. We get up here to the nuclei gracilis and nuclei cutaneous. They then cross over to the opposite side. Continue heading up, and eventually are going to interface with our conscious awareness up in our cerebral cortex. Now remember, the sensory input goes to what part of our brain? We're going to the postcentral gyrus, which is more functionally known as the primary somatosensory cortex. And that's why both those go to different spots, because the primary somatosensory cortex has spatial orientation. Each spot corresponds to a different part of the body. So this is our dorsal column, medial lemniscal pathway, heading all the way up into our primary somatosensory cortex. We then have one more sensory here. We have the spinothalamic pathway. You're going to have a pain receptor of the finger so you cut your finger, and then temperature receptor of the foot. Now notice how on the foot, as well as the hand, they both cross over immediately to the opposite side. So both of them immediately crossed over the spinal cord, so we're on the opposite side to start with now. They then head all the way up through the brainstem and all the way up through the thalamus, and eventually, again, the primary somatosensory cortex. So you know that the foot felt warm because there's flame there. You know the finger is hurting because you cut it. But it's on the opposite side of the body. So again, we have these right sides down here on one side. They then immediately cross over to the opposite side, allowing you to have the opposite side reacting to the opposite side of the body. Let's move into the motor pathways. So this is now coming down from the brain. We're going to originate right up here in the primary motor cortex. You notice there are two different pathways. There's a red and a pink here. We have the lateral, and then we also have the ventral corticospinal. What's going to happen is, you'll notice both those are traveling down, but then right here in the pyramids, we only have one crossing over. Only the lateral corticospinal crosses over at decussation. The other one, which is going to be coming straight down, you notice it's coming straight down, straight down, straight down, right down here, right when it's about ready to leave the spinal cord. That is when the ventral corticospinal crosses over. So not every single motor output crosses over at decussation. Some cross at decussation in the medulla, others go all the way down the spinal cord, cross over just as they're about ready to leave to wherever their pathway is going. So we have some that are decussation based, some that are crossing over down the spinal cord. And one more motor track. This is the rubrospinal. Now notice, it's not originating in our conscious control. It's originating right here in the red nucleus. So that means what's happening now is, this is more of a subconscious control, more of a, your body's counteracting and reacting to what's occurring. Things that's just helping us along that we're not thinking about. It comes down and it crossed over immediately. So it didn't even get down to decussation, immediately crossed over. Heads on down, if you notice it comes out the actual ventral horn here, ventral root, and right to the muscle. So that is looking at the rubrospinal tract, or the rubrospinal pathway. So a couple tracks and pathways of the white matter of the spinal cord.